Hey everyone, and welcome back to another journey through history's quieter corners. Tonight, we're diving deep into something truly fascinating, the ancient city of Ur and its remarkable trade system, recorded forever in thousands of clay tablets that survived when empires fell and monuments crumbled. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because we explore these forgotten economic worlds every week. And for those of you who've been with us on previous journeys, drop a comment below, letting me know where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing our global community come together to explore these ancient mysteries. Before we begin, take a moment to get truly comfortable. Adjust your pillows, dim those lights, maybe grab that favorite blanket. Tonight, we're not chasing dramatic battles or legendary heroes. Instead, we're going to step into the counting houses and marketplaces of one of humanity's first great commercial centers, where scribes bent over clay tablets by lamplight, recording transactions that would echo across millennia. We're exploring how a civilization built on mud and reeds created one of history's most sophisticated trade networks, all documented in a writing system that turned simple marks in clay into the foundation of recorded commerce. Let's begin our gentle journey into the bustling yet methodical world of ancient Ur, where every grain of barley, every bolt of cloth, every measure of silver was carefully recorded in wedge-shaped marks that still whisper their secrets to us today, 4,000 years later. The setting, Ur in its prime picture, if you will, the southern reaches of Mesopotamia around 2100 BCE, during the height of what we call the third dynasty of Ur. The landscape here is nothing like the desert we might imagine today. Instead, envision a network of carefully maintained canals threading through fertile fields, their waters reflecting the early morning sun as farmers wade through the shallows, tending to their crops of barley and dates. The air is thick with humidity from the nearby Persian Gulf, and the horizon shimmers with the heat that will build throughout the day. At the heart of this agricultural paradise sits Ur, its massive ziggurat rising like a man-made mountain from the flat plain. But our focus tonight isn't on that towering temple, impressive as it was. Instead, we're drawn to the bustling districts that surrounded it, the workshops where craftsmen shaped copper and gold, the warehouses where merchants stored goods from distant lands, and most importantly, for our story, the administrative buildings where scribes worked tirelessly to record every aspect of this complex economic machine. The city's location was no accident. Ur sat at the intersection of several crucial trade routes, positioned where the Euphrates River curved toward the Persian Gulf. Ships could sail directly from the Indian Ocean up the river to Ur's docks, while overland caravans from the Iranian plateau and the Levant found the city a natural stopping point. This geographic advantage, combined with the fertile soil of southern Mesopotamia, created the perfect conditions for what would become one of history's first truly international trade networks. Walking through Ur's streets in its heyday, you would have heard a dozen languages mixing in the air. Sumerian, of course, remained the language of administration and high culture, even though the political power had shifted to Akkadian-speaking rulers. But you might also catch snippets of Elamite from traders who had journeyed from the Iranian highlands, or the unfamiliar tongues of sailors who had navigated from the Indus Valley, bringing with them carved seals and exotic woods that had never been seen in Mesopotamia. The physical layout of the city reflected its commercial priorities. Unlike later cities that would be built around royal palaces or temple complexes, Ur was organized with trade and administration at its heart. Narrow streets wound between residential quarters where merchants and craftsmen lived in houses built around central courtyards. These weren't the grand palaces of kings, but comfortable middle-class homes with multiple rooms, indoor plumbing, and small family chapels. The prosperity of Ur's merchant class was evident in every brick and beam. But perhaps most remarkable of all were the archives, rooms upon rooms filled with clay tablets, each one a small miracle of human ingenuity. These weren't royal chronicles or religious texts, though those existed too. These were the business records of a thriving commercial civilization, contracts and receipts and inventories that tell us more about daily life in ancient Mesopotamia than any king's boastful inscriptions ever could. The revolution of written record keeping. To understand the significance of Ur's trade system, we must first appreciate the revolutionary nature of written record keeping itself. Imagine a world where every business transaction had to be remembered, where debts and credits existed only in human memory, where the death of a merchant could mean the loss of an entire network of commercial relationships. This was the reality for most of human history, and it severely limited the complexity and scale of economic activity. The development of cuneiform writing changed everything, though not all at once. The earliest cuneiform tablets, dating back to around 3200 BCE, were simple pictographic records, a drawing of a sheep to represent sheep, a drawing of grain to represent grain. But over the centuries, this system evolved into something far more sophisticated, capable of recording not just what was traded, but the intricate details of how trade was conducted. By the time of Ur's golden age, cuneiform had become a flexible tool for recording the most complex commercial arrangements. A single tablet might record a partnership agreement between merchants, specify the terms under which goods would be transported, detail the insurance arrangements for a risky venture, and establish the procedures for settling disputes, all in the space of a few square inches of clay. The scribes who created these records were not mere clerks. They were highly trained professionals who had spent years mastering not only the intricacies of cuneiform writing, but also the mathematical and legal knowledge necessary to conduct business. They understood compound interest and could calculate the depreciation of goods over time. They knew the standard weights and measures used in different cities and could convert between them accurately. They were familiar with the quality standards for various commodities and could draft contracts that protected their clients' interests. These scribes worked in specialized schools attached to temples or in private establishments run by master scribes. Their training was rigorous and began in childhood. They learned to write by copying literary texts, but they also studied practical subjects like mathematics, law, and commerce. By the time they were ready to practice their profession, they possessed a comprehensive understanding of the economic world in which they operated. The tablets they produced were made from the fine clay that was abundant in southern Mesopotamia. The clay was mixed with water and sometimes tempered with organic materials like chopped straw to prevent cracking. The scribe would shape a handful of this prepared clay into a tablet of the appropriate size, larger for complex contracts, smaller for simple receipts. Using a reed stylus cut to create the characteristic wedge-shaped marks, the scribe would press the writing into the wet clay with practiced precision. Once the writing was complete, The tablet would be left to dry in the sun, or for particularly important documents, fired in a kiln to create a permanent record. Some tablets were enclosed in clay envelopes that bore a summary of the contents, providing an additional layer of security against tampering. Others were stored in labeled containers or arranged on shelves in systematic order, creating the world's first filing systems. The durability of these clay records has proven remarkable. While papyrus scrolls and parchment documents from later periods have crumbled to dust, tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets have survived to tell us their stories. They have endured floods and fires, the collapse of cities, and the rise and fall of empires. In some cases, they have been preserved by the very disasters that destroyed the buildings where they were kept, buried in protective layers of ash and debris that kept them safe for millennia. The merchant houses of Ur, the heart of Ur's trade system, lay in its merchant houses, family businesses that often operated for generations, building networks of trust and credit that spanned the known world. These were not simple traders who bought and sold goods on a small scale. They were sophisticated commercial enterprises that combined manufacturing, banking, and international trade in ways that wouldn't be seen again until the rise of the great European merchant houses of the Renaissance. Consider the archive of Drehem, a town near Ur that served as a livestock distribution center for the entire region. The tablets from this site reveal a complex system for managing thousands of cattle and sheep that were collected as tax payments from across the empire and then redistributed to temples, royal households, and government officials. The scribes at Drehem maintained detailed records of every animal that passed through their facility, tracking not only quantities, but also quality grades, sources, and destinations. But the livestock operation at Drehem was just one facet of a much larger commercial network. The same merchant families who managed the cattle trade were also involved in textile production, metalworking, and long-distance commerce. They owned workshops where skilled craftsmen produced goods for export, warehouses where imported materials were stored and processed, and fleets of boats and donkey caravans that carried their products to markets across the ancient world. The scale of these operations was impressive by any standard. A single merchant house might employ hundreds of workers, weavers and metalworkers, sailors and caravan leaders, scribes and accountants. They maintained business relationships with partners in dozens of cities, from the copper mines of Anatolia to the pearl beds of the Persian Gulf. Their commercial networks were so extensive that a merchant in Ur could arrange for the delivery of goods to a customer in Syria or Iran without ever leaving his office, relying on a network of trusted agents and correspondents to handle the details. These merchant houses were typically organized as extended family enterprises, with different branches of the family specializing in different aspects of the business. One brother might focus on domestic trade, while another managed the international operations. Sons were trained from childhood to take their place in the family business, learning not only the practical skills they would need, but also the personal relationships that were essential to success in the ancient world. The archives of these merchant houses reveal business practices that were remarkably sophisticated. They used various forms of credit instruments, including promissory notes that could be transferred from one party to another. They employed insurance-like arrangements to protect against the loss of goods in transit. They established partnerships that allowed them to pool resources for large ventures while limiting individual risk. They even engaged in what we might recognize as futures trading, agreeing to buy or sell goods at specified prices for delivery at future dates. One of the most fascinating aspects of these commercial arrangements was their international character. A typical transaction might involve a merchant in Ur advancing silver to a partner in Kanesh, in modern Turkey, to purchase copper, which would then be shipped to Dilmun, modern Bahrain, to be traded for pearls, which would finally be brought back to Ur for sale in the local market. Each stage of this process would be documented in clay tablets, creating a paper trail that stretched across thousands of miles and involved dozens of intermediaries. The legal framework that supported these complex transactions was equally sophisticated. Mesopotamian law recognized various forms of business organization, from simple partnerships to complex corporate structures. It provided mechanisms for enforcing contracts across political boundaries and established procedures for resolving commercial disputes. It protected the rights of creditors, while also providing safeguards against exploitation of debtors. Perhaps most importantly, this legal system recognized the binding nature of written contracts. A cuneiform tablet bearing the seals of the contracting parties was considered legally equivalent to their personal oaths, creating a level of security and predictability that made long-distance trade possible on an unprecedented scale. This legal innovation was perhaps as important as the development of writing itself in enabling the growth of Mesopotamian commerce, the accounting systems that built an empire. The administrative tablets from Ur reveal an accounting system of breathtaking complexity and sophistication. These weren't simple lists of income and expenses, but comprehensive records that tracked the flow of goods and services through every level of society. They recorded not only commercial transactions, but also tax collections, temple offerings, royal distributions, and diplomatic gifts. Together, they provide a complete picture of how an ancient economy actually functioned. The basic unit of this system was the individual transaction record, a small tablet that documented a specific exchange of goods or services. These might record the sale of a field, the wages paid to a worker, the offering made to a temple, or the tribute sent to a foreign ruler. Each tablet followed standardized formats that made it easy for administrators to process and file them systematically. But the true genius of the Mesopotamian accounting system lay in its hierarchical structure. Individual transaction records were summarized in daily, monthly, and annual reports that were then forwarded to higher levels of administration. A local temple might send monthly summaries of its income and expenses to regional administrators who would compile them with reports from other temples to create comprehensive accounts for their entire district. At the highest level, royal administrators maintained accounts that tracked the economic activity of the entire empire. They knew how much grain was produced in each province, how much silver was collected in taxes, how many workers were available for public projects, and how much surplus was available for trade or military campaigns. This information allowed them to make informed decisions about resource allocation and long-term planning that would have been impossible without systematic record-keeping. The mathematical sophistication of these accounting systems was remarkable. Mesopotamian scribes used a sexagesimal base 60 number system that allowed them to perform complex calculations with remarkable precision. They understood fractions and could calculate compound interest, depreciation, and amortization. They developed standardized systems of weights and measures that facilitated trade across political boundaries and cultural differences. Consider the complexity involved in a simple transaction like the sale of a field. The scribes had to record not only the size of the field and its sale price, but also its productivity rating, its water rights, any existing liens or encumbrances, the terms of payment, and the procedures for transferring ownership. They had to calculate the appropriate taxes and fees, ensure that all legal requirements were met, and create records that could be referenced years or even decades later if disputes arose. The storage and retrieval of these records required equally sophisticated systems. Archives were organized by subject matter, with separate sections for different types of transactions. Within each section, tablets were arranged chronologically and cross-referenced by the names of the parties involved. Some archives included index tablets that listed the contents of entire collections, making it possible for administrators to locate specific records quickly and efficiently. The personnel required to maintain these systems was enormous. Large institutions like temples or royal palaces employed dozens of scribes, each with specialized responsibilities. Some focused on incoming records, others on outgoing correspondence. Some specialized in particular types of transactions, while others handled routine filing and maintenance tasks. At the top of this hierarchy were senior administrators who supervised the entire operation and were responsible for producing the summary reports that informed policy decisions. The career paths of these administrative scribes reveal a great deal about the values and priorities of Mesopotamian society. Scribal training was extensive and expensive, but it offered the possibility of significant social mobility. A talented young man from a modest background could, through scribal education, rise to positions of considerable responsibility and influence. Many of the high officials whose names appear in royal inscriptions began their careers as junior scribes in temple or palace archives. The importance placed on accurate record-keeping is evident in the severe penalties that were imposed for falsifying accounts. Scribes who were caught altering records or creating fraudulent documents could face heavy fines, physical punishment, or even death. These harsh penalties reflected the understanding that the entire economic system depended on the reliability and integrity of written records. International trade networks and diplomatic commerce. The tablets from Ur reveal a world where commerce and diplomacy were inextricably intertwined, where merchant ventures served political purposes and royal gifts facilitated private trade. The boundaries between public and private, between commerce and statecraft, were far more fluid in the ancient world than they would become in later periods. Royal correspondence tablets show us how rulers used trade as an instrument of foreign policy. A king might send valuable gifts to a foreign ruler not out of generosity, but as a way of establishing a relationship that would benefit his merchants. These diplomatic gifts, gold vessels, precious stones, exotic animals, skilled craftsmen, were carefully chosen to demonstrate both wealth and cultural sophistication. They served as advertisements for the sender's kingdom and implicit invitations for reciprocal treatment of his subjects abroad. The response to such gifts was equally calculated. A wise ruler would reciprocate not just with gifts of equal value, but with privileges for the sender's merchants, reduced customs duties, preferential access to local markets, protection for caravans, and trading posts. These arrangements were typically formalized in treaties that established the legal framework for ongoing commercial relationships. Consider the relationship between Ur and Dilmun, the island kingdom that controlled access to the rich trade routes of the Persian Gulf. Dilmun occupied a strategic position that allowed it to serve as an intermediary between Mesopotamia and the distant lands of the Indus Valley. Rather than attempt to conquer, this important trading partner The rulers of Ur chose instead to cultivate a mutually beneficial relationship through a combination of diplomatic gifts and commercial privileges. The tablets record regular exchanges of luxury goods between the two kingdoms, Mesopotamian textiles and metalwork flowing south, while pearls, exotic woods, and precious stones moved north. But they also document the complex arrangements that made this trade possible. Agreements on standard weights and measures, procedures for resolving disputes between merchants of different nationalities, and protocols for the treatment of foreign traders in local courts. These diplomatic commercial relationships created networks of mutual dependency that helped maintain peace and stability across the ancient world. A ruler who attacked the merchants of a trading partner risked not only retaliation, but also the loss of access to goods and markets that his own economy had come to depend upon. Trade created incentives for cooperation that often proved more durable than military alliances or territorial agreements. The private merchants who operated within this framework were skilled at navigating the complex intersection of commerce and politics. They maintained relationships with court officials who could facilitate their activities, but they also cultivated connections with merchants in other cities who could provide local knowledge and support. They understood that success in international trade required not just business acumen, but also diplomatic sensitivity. The tablets reveal fascinating details about how these merchant networks actually operated. Trade expeditions were typically organized as partnerships that brought together investors, traders, and transport specialists. A typical venture might involve several merchants pooling their resources to purchase a cargo of goods, hiring a caravan leader to manage the transportation, and arranging for local agents to handle sales at the destination. The risks involved in these ventures were substantial. Caravans faced dangers from bandits, storms, and political instability. Ships could be lost to pirates or storms. Even successful expeditions might find that market conditions had changed during their absence, making their carefully chosen cargoes worthless. The tablets record numerous cases of merchants who lost their entire investments in such ventures. To manage these risks, merchants developed sophisticated financial instruments that we might recognize as early forms of insurance. Partners might agree to share losses according to predetermined formulas. Wealthy merchants might underwrite multiple expeditions, spreading their risk across different routes and markets. Some traders specialized in particularly dangerous but potentially profitable routes, while others focused on safer but less lucrative local trade. The goods that moved through these networks tell their own fascinating stories. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus. Each commodity represents a chain of relationships stretching across thousands of miles. The tablets sometimes provide glimpses into these supply chains, revealing how a piece of jewelry sold in Ur might incorporate materials from half a dozen different regions, each one representing a separate commercial relationship. The daily rhythm of commercial life. Beyond the grand narratives of international trade and diplomatic commerce, the tablets from Ur also preserve intimate details of daily commercial life that bring this ancient world to vivid reality. These routine records, receipts for small purchases, work assignments for craftsmen, household account books, provide insights into how ordinary people participated in this complex economic system. The workshops of Ur operated according to rhythms that were both seasonal and social. Textile production, one of the city's major industries, was timed to coincide with the agricultural calendar. Wool arrived from pastoral areas during shearing season, while flax was processed after the annual harvest. The tablets record the careful scheduling required to coordinate these activities, when raw materials would arrive, which workers would be assigned to which tasks, how long each stage of production was expected to take. The organization of this work reveals a society that was both hierarchical and surprisingly fluid. At the top were the workshop owners and master craftsmen, whose names appear repeatedly in the archives as they contracted for materials, hired workers, and negotiated sales. Below them were skilled workers, whose specialized knowledge commanded respect and good wages. At the bottom were laborers and apprentices who performed routine tasks under supervision. But the boundaries between these categories were not fixed. The tablets show workers moving between different workshops as demand fluctuated, skilled craftsmen establishing their own businesses, and successful merchants expanding into manufacturing. Social mobility was possible for those with talent, ambition, and perhaps a bit of luck. The daily operations of these workshops required constant coordination and communication. Raw materials had to be ordered and scheduled for delivery. Workers had to be hired and assigned to specific tasks. Quality standards had to be maintained and finished goods prepared for shipment. Each of these activities generated paperwork that was carefully filed and preserved. Consider a typical day in a textile workshop. The morning might begin with the arrival of a delivery of wool, requiring tablets to record the quantity, quality, and source of the material. The workshop foreman would then assign portions of this wool to different workers, creating additional records that tracked who was responsible for what. As the day progressed, completed work would be inspected and approved, generating receipts that the workers could use to claim their wages. Meanwhile, the workshop owner might be negotiating a contract for a large order of finished cloth, requiring detailed specifications for quality, quantity, and delivery schedules. He might also be arranging for the purchase of dyes or other materials needed for future production, creating records that would need to be coordinated with the workshop's production schedule. All of this activity generated a constant stream of small clay tablets that were filed away in the workshop's archive. Individually, these documents might seem mundane, but collectively, they provide an extraordinarily detailed picture of how manufacturing was organized in the ancient world. The retail trade that connected these workshops with their customers was equally well documented. The tablets record sales to local customers, as well as bulk shipments to merchants who would carry the goods to distant markets. They show how seasonal demand patterns affected production schedules and how workshops adjusted their output to take advantage of changing market conditions. The credit relationships that supported this commercial activity were complex and sophisticated. Workshops often operated on extended payment terms, delivering goods to customers who would pay after they had been resold. Raw material suppliers similarly extended credit to workshops, accepting payment after the materials had been processed and sold. These credit networks required careful record-keeping to track who owed what to whom and when payments were due. The legal framework that governed these relationships was detailed and comprehensive. Contracts specified not only prices and quantities, but also quality standards, delivery schedules, and procedures for resolving disputes. They established penalties for late delivery or substandard goods and created mechanisms for renegotiating terms when circumstances changed. Perhaps most remarkably, these commercial relationships often persisted across generations. The tablets show the same families doing business with each other decade after decade, with sons inheriting not only their father's workshops, but also their business relationships and credit arrangements. This continuity provided stability and predictability that was essential for long-term planning and investment. The role of temples in commercial life. The temples of Ur were not simply religious institutions, but major economic actors that played crucial roles in the city's trade networks. They owned vast estates, employed thousands of workers, and maintained complex commercial relationships that extended across the ancient world. The archived tablets from these temples provide some of our most detailed information about how large-scale economic activity was organized and managed. The Temple of Nana, Ur's patron deity, was particularly important in this regard. Its estates encompass thousands of acres of agricultural land, workshops for manufacturing textiles and metalwork, and trading operations that reached from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. The temple's administrators maintained detailed records of all these activities, creating an archive that rivals those of the great merchant houses in its scope and sophistication. The agricultural operations alone required enormous administrative effort. The temple owned fields throughout the region, each with its own productivity characteristics, water rights, and labor requirements. The tablets record not only annual production figures, but also detailed information about crop rotation, irrigation maintenance, and seasonal labor allocation. They show how temple administrators balanced immediate income needs against long-term soil fertility and infrastructure requirements. The temple workshops produced goods both for religious purposes and for commercial sale. Sacred vessels and ceremonial garments were crafted to the highest standards, while more ordinary products were manufactured for export to distant markets. The tablets reveal how these dual purposes were balanced, with skilled craftsmen dividing their time between sacred and secular work, according to carefully planned schedules. But perhaps most interesting are the records of the temple's trading operations. Like the merchant houses, the temple maintained networks of commercial relationships that spanned the ancient world. It invested in trading expeditions, extended credit to merchants, and established business partnerships with institutions in other cities. The profits from these activities helped fund the temple's religious functions, while also contributing to the broader economic prosperity of the community. The temple also served important financial functions that we might associate with banks in the modern world. It accepted deposits from private individuals, extended loans to merchants and craftsmen, and facilitated complex financial transactions that involved multiple parties. The security provided by the temple's sacred status made it a trusted intermediary for business arrangements that might otherwise have been difficult to enforce. The integration of religious and commercial activities created interesting ethical questions that the temple administrators had to navigate carefully. How could an institution dedicated to serving the gods also pursue profit in the marketplace? How should religious obligations be balanced against commercial opportunities? The tablets show that these questions were taken seriously and that considerable effort was made to ensure that commercial activities supported rather than compromised the temple's religious mission. The temple's role as a major employer also had important social implications. It provided work for everyone from highly skilled craftsmen to unskilled laborers, creating opportunities for social advancement while also maintaining hierarchical relationships that reflected religious and social values. The career paths available within the temple system offered alternatives to purely commercial pursuits while still requiring many of the same skills and knowledge. The seasonal rhythms of temple life created their own commercial patterns. Religious festivals required special preparations that might involve months of advanced planning and coordination with suppliers and craftsmen. These periodic surges in demand had ripple effects throughout the local economy as workshops increased production and merchants imported special materials needed for ceremonial purposes. The temple also played a crucial role in maintaining the standards and practices that made commercial life possible. It housed the schools where scribes were trained, maintained the weights and measures used in trade, and provided legal services for resolving commercial disputes. In many ways, the temple served as a kind of commercial infrastructure that supported the entire economic system. The relationship between temple and state added another layer of complexity to these arrangements. The temple owed certain obligations to the royal government, including tax payments and contributions to public works projects. But it also enjoyed privileges and protections that enhanced its commercial effectiveness. Balancing these relationships required diplomatic skill and careful attention to the political currents that affected the broader community. The mathematics of ancient commerce. The computational requirements of Ur's complex trade system led to remarkable mathematical innovations that would influence commercial practice for millennia. The cuneiform tablets preserve not only the results of these calculations, but also the methods and procedures that made them possible, offering us insight into one of humanity's earliest systematic approaches to commercial mathematics. The basic challenge was formidable: how to perform accurate calculations involving different systems of weights, measures, and currencies, while also accounting for variables like quality grades, seasonal price fluctuations, and transportation costs. The Mesopotamian solution was to develop standardized procedures and reference tables that allowed scribes to handle even the most complex transactions with confidence and precision. The sexagesimal number system used in Mesopotamia was particularly well suited to commercial calculations. Because 60 can be divided evenly by many different numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, it was easy to calculate fractions and proportions without dealing with awkward remainders. This made it much simpler to divide goods among partners, calculate percentage shares, or convert between different units of measurement. The tablets reveal sophisticated understanding of concepts that we might consider advanced mathematics. Compound interest calculations appear regularly in loan documents, with scribes accurately computing how debts would grow over time under various payment schedules. Depreciation schedules show understanding of how goods lose value through age, wear, or market changes. Risk assessment calculations attempt to quantify the probability of loss in different types of business ventures. Consider the mathematical complexity involved in a typical international trading expedition. The organizers had to calculate the initial investment required, including the cost of goods, transportation, and various fees and taxes. They had to estimate the potential profits based on expected sale prices in the destination market, adjusted for the possibility of price changes during the journey. They had to determine how profits and losses would be divided among the various partners, each of whom might have contributed different amounts or types of resources to the venture. The tablets show that these calculations were performed systematically using standardized procedures that could be replicated by different scribes in different locations. This standardization was crucial for maintaining trust and cooperation in commercial relationships that might span thousands of miles and involve dozens of intermediaries. The mathematical tools developed for commercial purposes found applications in other areas as well. The same techniques used to calculate interest on loans were applied to temple offerings and tax assessments. The methods for converting between different measurement systems were used in construction projects and agricultural planning. The risk assessment procedures developed for trade ventures influenced military planning and diplomatic strategy. The training required to master these mathematical skills was extensive and demanding. Scribal schools maintained collections of practice problems that students had to solve repeatedly until they achieved complete accuracy. These problems covered every aspect of commercial mathematics, from simple addition and subtraction to complex, multi-step calculations involving several different variables. The tablets also preserve evidence of mathematical innovation and experimentation. Some scribes developed new computational shortcuts or alternative methods for solving standard problems. Others created more sophisticated models for predicting market behavior or assessing commercial risks. These innovations were shared among professional colleagues and gradually incorporated into standard practice. The accuracy achieved by these ancient mathematicians was remarkable by any standard. Modern scholars who have checked their calculations typically find them to be correct, down to the smallest fractions. This precision was essential for maintaining the trust and cooperation that made complex commercial relationships possible. Perhaps most impressive was the development of what we might recognize as early forms of statistical analysis. Some tablets attempt to identify patterns in price fluctuations, seasonal demand variations, or the success rates of different types of business ventures. While these analyses were necessarily limited by the available data and computational tools, they represent sophisticated attempts to understand and predict economic behavior. The mathematical legacy of Mesopotamian commerce extended far beyond the ancient world. Many of the computational techniques developed in Ur and other commercial centers were transmitted to later civilizations through trade contacts and cultural exchanges. Some can be traced through Greek and Islamic mathematics to the commercial practices of medieval and Renaissance Europe, quality control, and standards in ancient manufacturing. The tablets from Ur's workshops reveal a sophisticated system of quality control that ensured the city's products could compete effectively in international markets. These weren't informal arrangements based on trust and reputation, though those elements were important, but systematic procedures that established clear standards and provided mechanisms for enforcement. The textile industry, one of Ur's most important exports, developed particularly elaborate quality standards. The tablets describe different grades of wool based on the age and breed of the sheep, the season when it was sheared, and the care with which it was processed. Similar classifications existed for linen, with distinctions based on the quality of the flax and the skill of the weavers who processed it. These quality distinctions weren't merely academic. They had direct economic consequences, with higher grades commanding premium prices in both domestic and international markets. The tablets record price differentials that could be substantial. The finest grades of cloth might sell for several times the price of ordinary quality material. Maintaining these quality standards required careful attention at every stage of production. Raw materials had to be sorted and graded when they arrived at the workshops. Workers had to be trained to recognize quality differences and to adjust their techniques accordingly. Finished products had to be inspected and certified before they could be shipped to customers. The inspection procedures were detailed and systematic. Trained quality inspectors examined finished goods against established standards, checking not only the basic construction, but also more subtle characteristics like color, consistency, texture, and durability. Products that met the highest standards were marked with special seals or tags that certified their quality. Those that fell short might be reclassified to lower grades or rejected entirely. The economic incentives for maintaining quality were powerful. Workshops that consistently produced high-quality goods could command premium prices and develop loyal customer bases. Those that allowed standards to slip found themselves competing on price alone, a much less profitable position. The tablets show that successful workshops invested heavily in quality control, viewing it as essential to their long-term profitability. The development of these quality systems required cooperation between workshops, merchants, and customers. Standards had to be consistent enough that a merchant in Ur could confidently order goods for delivery to a customer in Syria, knowing that both parties understood what quality level was expected. This required ongoing communication and adjustment as markets and technologies evolved. The metalworking industry developed similar quality standards, though the criteria were necessarily different. Copper and bronze objects were evaluated based on their purity, strength, and finish. The tablets describe testing procedures that allowed craftsmen to assess the quality of raw materials and verify that finished products met specifications. Tool making required particularly precise standards, since the effectiveness and safety of implements depended directly on their quality. The tablets record detailed specifications for axes, knives, and other tools, including requirements for hardness, sharpness, and durability. Some documents describe testing procedures that evaluated tools under actual working conditions before they were approved for sale. The pottery industry, while perhaps less glamorous than textiles or metalwork, also developed sophisticated quality standards. Different types of vessels were evaluated according to different criteria: storage jars for their capacity and durability, fine tableware for their appearance and finish, cooking pots for their heat resistance and ease of use. Quality control in food processing was equally important, though the challenges were somewhat different. Preserved foods had to maintain their nutritional value and palatability over extended periods, often under difficult storage conditions. The tablets describe procedures for selecting raw materials, controlling processing conditions, and testing finished products to ensure they met safety and quality standards. The beer brewing industry, which was economically important throughout Mesopotamia, developed particularly sophisticated quality control procedures. Different types of beer were distinguished not only by their ingredients, but also by their alcohol content, flavor, and appearance. The tablets record detailed recipes and processing procedures that were designed to ensure consistent quality batch after batch. The enforcement of quality standards required both formal procedures and informal social pressure. Workshops that consistently failed to meet standards might find themselves excluded from important commercial networks or subjected to legal penalties. The tablets record several cases where quality disputes led to formal legal proceedings, suggesting that these standards had real economic and legal consequences. The reputation effects of quality control were long-lasting and far-reaching. Workshops and regions that developed reputations for high-quality products could maintain premium positions in international markets for generations. Conversely, those that allowed their standards to deteriorate might find it very difficult to rebuild their commercial relationships. The training required to maintain these quality standards was extensive and ongoing. Master craftsmen had to pass on not only technical skills, but also quality consciousness to their apprentices and workers. This knowledge transfer was crucial for maintaining standards across generations and ensuring that quality systems could adapt to changing market conditions and technological innovations. These ancient quality control systems established principles that remain relevant today. The emphasis on clear standards, systematic inspection, and continuous improvement created a foundation for commercial trust that made complex trade relationships possible. The tablets from Ur show us that the connection between quality and commercial success was understood and acted upon 4,000 years ago in ways that would be familiar to modern business managers. The legacy of these quality systems extended beyond their immediate economic impact. They helped establish cultural values that emphasized craftsmanship, reliability, and customer satisfaction. These values became embedded in the commercial culture of Mesopotamia and were transmitted to later civilizations through trade contacts and cultural exchanges. The end of an era, decline, and archaeological legacy as we draw toward the end of our journey through the bustling commercial world of ancient Ur, we must also consider how this remarkable system eventually came to an end, and how its legacy has been preserved for us to discover thousands of years later. The decline of Ur's trade networks was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual transformation that reflected broader changes in the ancient world. The gradual transformation and decline, the beginning of the end for Ur's golden age of trade, came not from any single catastrophic event, but from a combination of environmental, political, and economic pressures that gradually undermined the foundations of its commercial prosperity. The tablets from the later periods of Ur's history tell a story of adaptation and resilience, but also of inexorable decline as the conditions that had made the city's success possible began to change. The most fundamental challenge was environmental. The intricate irrigation system that had made southern Mesopotamia so fertile was also its greatest vulnerability. Over centuries of intensive agriculture, salt had been building up in the soil as irrigation water evaporated, leaving behind mineral deposits that gradually reduced crop yields. The tablets from this period showed declining agricultural productivity, with yields dropping to levels that could no longer support the large urban population and extensive trade networks. The political landscape was also shifting in ways that undermined Ur's commercial advantages. The rise of new powers in Babylon and Assyria created competing centers of trade and administration that drew away some of Ur's traditional business. These northern cities had better access to the overland trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with Anatolia and the Levant, while their more centralized political systems allowed them to coordinate large-scale commercial activities more efficiently. Climate change played a role as well, though its effects were gradual and might not have been immediately apparent to the people living through them. The tablets suggest that the region was becoming more arid, with less reliable rainfall and reduced flow in the rivers that fed the irrigation systems. This environmental stress exacerbated the existing problems with soil salination and made it more difficult to maintain the agricultural surplus that supported urban life. The international trade networks that had been Ur's strength also became a source of vulnerability as political conditions changed in distant regions. Wars and political instability in trading partner regions disrupted established commercial relationships and forced merchants to seek alternative routes and markets. The tablets record increasing difficulties in maintaining regular contact with traditional partners, as well as the higher costs and greater risks associated with trade in an increasingly unstable world. Yet the merchants and administrators of Ur did not simply accept decline passively. The tablets show numerous attempts to adapt to changing conditions and find new sources of prosperity. Some merchant houses shifted their focus from international trade to domestic activities, concentrating on serving local markets and regional networks. Others attempted to develop new trading relationships with emerging powers, though these efforts often proved less profitable than their traditional arrangements. The temple administrations also adapted their strategies, reducing their involvement in long-distance trade while focusing more heavily on their local agricultural and manufacturing operations. Some temples converted portions of their estates to different crops that were better suited to the changing environmental conditions, while others invested in new technologies for salt removal and soil improvement. These adaptation efforts were partially successful in slowing the rate of decline, but they could not ultimately overcome the fundamental challenges facing the region. The tablets from the final centuries of Ur's independence show a gradual reduction in the scale and complexity of commercial activities, as the city transformed from an international trading center into a more modest regional market town. The psychological impact of this decline is also visible in the tablets. The confident, expansive tone of earlier commercial documents gives way to more cautious, conservative approaches that emphasize preservation over growth. Risk-taking diminishes as merchants become more focused on protecting what they have rather than pursuing new opportunities. The elaborate quality control systems are simplified as the demand for premium goods decreases. By the time Ur was finally incorporated into the Babylonian Empire, its role as a major commercial center had largely ended. The new political arrangements favored other cities that were better positioned to serve the needs of the expanded empire. While Ur continued to exist and even to prosper in more modest ways, it never again achieved the international prominence that had characterized its golden age. The final abandonment of Ur came much later, probably sometime in the early centuries of the Christian era, as shifting river courses and continued environmental degradation made the site increasingly difficult to inhabit. The last residents left behind their possessions and their tablet archives, creating the archaeological deposits that would preserve their stories for future discovery. Archaeological discoveries and modern understanding. The rediscovery of Ur and its archives represents one of archaeology's greatest triumphs, transforming our understanding of ancient economic history and revealing the sophistication of Mesopotamian commercial culture. The story of these discoveries is almost as fascinating as the ancient tablets themselves, involving decades of painstaking excavation and scholarship that has gradually brought this lost world back to light. The modern rediscovery of Ur began in the mid-19th century, when European travelers and scholars first began to identify and excavate Mesopotamian sites. Early excavators were primarily interested in recovering spectacular artifacts and royal treasures, paying less attention to the thousands of clay tablets that were their most valuable finds. Many early discoveries were dispersed to museums and private collections around the world, making it difficult for scholars to study complete archives and understand the relationships between different documents. The systematic study of Ur's commercial archives really began in the early 20th century, as scholars developed better methods for reading cuneiform and began to appreciate the historical significance of business documents. The work of Sir Leonard Woolley at Ur in the 1920s and 1930s was particularly important, as he pioneered more careful excavation techniques that preserved the archaeological context of tablet finds and allowed scholars to reconstruct how ancient archives were originally organized. Woolley's excavations revealed the extent and sophistication of Ur's commercial districts, uncovering the remains of workshops, warehouses, and administrative buildings that had housed the tablet archives. His careful documentation of where tablets were found and how they were stored provided crucial information about how ancient filing systems worked and how different types of documents were organized and preserved. The process of translating and interpreting these tablets has been enormously challenging, requiring not only linguistic expertise, but also deep knowledge of ancient economic practices and cultural contexts. Many tablets are damaged or incomplete, requiring scholars to reconstruct missing portions based on parallel texts and contextual clues. The specialized vocabulary of commercial documents includes many technical terms that appear nowhere else in ancient literature, forcing scholars to deduce their meanings from context and usage patterns. The mathematical content of the tablets has proven particularly challenging to interpret, as it requires understanding not only the ancient number systems and calculation methods, but also the economic concepts and practices that these calculations were meant to support. Modern scholars have had to reconstruct ancient systems of weights, measures, and currencies, often working from fragmentary evidence and conflicting sources. The collaborative nature of modern cuneiform scholarship has been essential to making progress on these complex problems. Scholars from around the world have worked together to create comprehensive dictionaries, standardized transliteration systems, and digital databases that make ancient texts more accessible to researchers. International conferences and scholarly exchanges have facilitated the sharing of knowledge and expertise across linguistic and cultural boundaries. The development of digital technologies has revolutionized the study of cuneiform tablets, making it possible to create detailed photographs and 3D models that reveal features invisible to the naked eye. Computer databases allow scholars to search through thousands of texts for specific words or phrases, identifying patterns and connections that would have been impossible to discover through manual research methods. These technological advances have also made it possible to reunite scattered archives, virtually reconstructing collections that were dispersed during early excavations. Tablets in museums around the world can now be studied together digitally, allowing scholars to understand complete business enterprises and their operations in ways that were previously impossible. The impact of these discoveries on our understanding of ancient history has been profound. Before the decipherment of cuneiform business archives, ancient economic history was largely a matter of speculation based on scattered references in royal inscriptions and literary texts. The tablets from and other commercial sites have provided detailed, quantitative information about how ancient economies actually functioned, revealing levels of sophistication and complexity that few scholars had imagined possible. These discoveries have also changed our understanding of social and cultural history, revealing the extent to which commercial activities influenced every aspect of ancient life. The tablets show how trade networks facilitated cultural exchange, how commercial relationships affected political alliances, and how economic prosperity enabled artistic and intellectual achievements. They provide insights into the lives of ordinary people, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, and workers, whose stories are rarely preserved in other types of ancient sources. The ongoing publication and study of cuneiform archives continues to yield new insights and discoveries. Scholars estimate that hundreds of thousands of tablets remain unstudied in museum collections around the world, each one potentially containing new information about ancient, economic, and social life. New excavations at Mesopotamian sites continue to uncover additional archives, expanding our knowledge of ancient commercial practices and their regional variations. Lessons from clay. What Ur's tablets teach us today as we reflect on the remarkable commercial world revealed by Ur's cuneiform archives, we can identify lessons and insights that remain relevant to our understanding of economic behavior and commercial organization. These ancient tablets offer a unique perspective on fundamental questions about trade, trust, and economic development that continue to challenge societies today. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Ur's commercial archives is the importance of reliable record-keeping and institutional frameworks for economic development. The sophisticated accounting systems and legal procedures that supported Mesopotamian trade created levels of trust and predictability that made complex commercial relationships possible across vast distances and cultural differences. This institutional infrastructure was perhaps more important than any single innovation or technology in enabling economic growth and prosperity. The international character of Ur's trade networks also offers insights into the benefits and challenges of economic globalization. The tablets show how trade relationships created mutual dependencies that encouraged peaceful cooperation and cultural exchange, but they also reveal how political instability and environmental changes in distant regions could have devastating effects on local economies. The merchants of Ur learned to manage these risks through diversification and careful relationship management, strategies that remain relevant for international businesses today. The role of education and human capital development in Ur's commercial success is another lesson worth noting. The extensive training required to become a competent scribe or merchant created an educated class that could adapt to changing conditions and develop innovative solutions to commercial challenges. The investment in education and skill development was essential for maintaining Ur's competitive advantages in international markets. The integration of commercial and religious institutions in Mesopotamian society offers an interesting perspective on the relationship between economic activity and social values. The temples of Ur were major economic actors, but they were also guardians of ethical standards and social stability. This integration helped ensure that commercial success contributed to broader social welfare rather than undermining community cohesion. The quality control systems developed by Ur's craftsmen demonstrate the importance of reputation and standards in building sustainable competitive advantages. The city's merchants understood that short-term profits from inferior goods would ultimately damage their long-term business prospects, leading them to invest heavily in maintaining quality standards even when it reduced immediate profitability. The mathematical and computational innovations required for commercial activities in Ur also highlight the relationship between economic development and intellectual progress. The need to perform accurate calculations and maintain reliable records drove innovations in mathematics, writing, and information management that had applications far beyond commerce. Economic activity served as a catalyst for broader intellectual and cultural development. The environmental challenges that ultimately contributed to Ur's decline offer sobering lessons about the relationship between economic activity and ecological sustainability. The intensive agriculture that supported the city's prosperity gradually degraded the very resources on which it depended, creating long-term vulnerabilities that proved impossible to overcome. This pattern of environmental overexploitation, followed by economic decline, has been repeated many times throughout history and remains a concern today. The adaptability shown by Ur's merchants and administrators in the face of changing conditions demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of economic adjustment. While individual businesses and institutions could modify their strategies to cope with new challenges, they could not ultimately overcome fundamental changes in their operating environment. This suggests the importance of maintaining flexibility and diversity in economic systems, while also recognizing the limits of adaptation. The social mobility enabled by commercial success in Urs illustrates how trade and economic development can create opportunities for individuals to improve their circumstances and contribute to society. The careers of successful merchants and skilled craftsmen show that economic growth can benefit broad segments of society, not just political and religious elites. The decline and eventual abandonment of Ur also provides insights into the factors that determine the long-term sustainability of economic systems. Cities and regions that fail to adapt to changing environmental, technological, or political conditions may find their competitive advantages eroded beyond recovery. The tablets from Ur's final centuries show how gradual decline can accelerate once certain thresholds are crossed, making recovery increasingly difficult. Perhaps most fundamentally, the archives from Ur demonstrate the central role of trust and cooperation in making complex economic relationships possible. The elaborate legal frameworks, quality standards, and accounting procedures that supported Mesopotamian trade were all ultimately designed to create and maintain trust between parties who might never meet in person but who needed to rely on each other for their mutual prosperity. The human stories behind the numbers. We've explored the systematic and institutional aspects of Ur's trade networks. It's important to remember that behind every clay tablet was a human story. Real people making decisions, taking risks, celebrating successes, and coping with failures. The archives preserve not just economic data, but glimpses into the personal experiences of individuals who lived and worked in this ancient commercial world. Consider Nasir, a copper merchant whose archive was discovered in his house in Ur's residential district. His tablets reveal a businessman struggling with the challenges of international trade in an uncertain world. Some documents record successful ventures that brought him substantial profits, while others detail disputes with customers who complained about the quality of his copper or the delays in his deliveries. One famous tablet preserves a particularly harsh complaint from a customer named Nani, who accused Nasir of delivering inferior copper and treating him rudely when he tried to resolve the problem. These personal disputes remind us that commercial relationships in the ancient world, like today, depended on trust and reputation, but that maintaining these relationships required constant attention and effort. Nasir's responses to his critics show a merchant trying to balance customer satisfaction with profitability, defending his practices while also trying to preserve valuable business relationships. The archive of Kandalanu, a wealthy textile merchant, tells a different kind of story. His tablets reveal a successful businessman who built an international trading empire through careful planning and strategic partnerships. His contracts show sophisticated understanding of market conditions and risk management, while his correspondence reveals the personal relationships that made his business success possible. But even Kandalanu's archive includes documents that hint at personal costs, family disputes over business decisions, health problems that may have been related to the stress of managing complex operations, and concerns about succession planning as he aged. The tablets also preserve stories of women who participated in commercial life, though their roles were often different from those of men. Lu Enlila, whose archive was found in a temple complex, appears to have managed extensive business operations on behalf of the temple administration. Her documents show her negotiating with suppliers, managing workers, and overseeing quality control in temple workshops. Her success in these roles demonstrates that women could achieve significant responsibility and influence in certain contexts, even though they operated within a male-dominated society. The career of Ur-Dumuzida, a scribe who worked for several different merchant houses over the course of his lifetime, illustrates the opportunities and challenges faced by educated professionals in this commercial world. His early tablets show him performing routine copying and filing tasks for modest wages, but later documents reveal him taking on more complex responsibilities and eventually establishing his own small business, providing accounting services to other merchants. His story demonstrates how education and skill could create paths for social mobility, but also shows the hard work and persistence required to take advantage of these opportunities. Some tablets preserve poignant glimpses of commercial relationships that went beyond mere business transactions. The correspondence between Imgur Sin, a merchant in Ur, and his business partner Shamash Nasir, who lived in distant Kanesh, reveals a friendship that developed over years of trading together. Their letters discuss not only business matters, but also personal news, family celebrations, health concerns, and shared experiences during their travels. When Shamash Nasir died suddenly during a trading expedition, Imgur Sin's letters to the deceased man's family showed genuine grief and a commitment to honoring their business obligations despite his personal loss. The tablets also document the apprenticeship and training experiences that prepared young people for careers in commerce. The archive of Rim Sin Anam includes practice exercises written by his apprentices as they learned to calculate interest, convert between different measurement systems, and draft contracts. The mistakes and corrections in these practice tablets remind us that even in the ancient world, mastering commercial skills required patience, practice, and good instruction. Family businesses created their own dynamics and challenges, as revealed in the archive of the House of Garmesh. 3 generations of this merchant family left records that show how business practices and relationships evolved over time. The tablets revealed tensions between fathers and sons over business strategies, negotiations over inheritance arrangements, and efforts to maintain business relationships across generational transitions. They also show how family members supported each other during difficult times, pooling resources to help relatives recover from failed ventures or personal setbacks. The human cost of commercial life is also visible in the tablets. The archives contain numerous references to merchants who died during trading expeditions, workers who were injured in workshop accidents, and families that were ruined by bad business decisions or economic downturns. While the commercial system of Ur created opportunities for prosperity and social advancement, it also involved real risks and genuine hardships for those who participated in it. The tablets preserve evidence of charitable activities and social responsibility that suggest commercial success was often accompanied by community obligations. Wealthy merchants contributed to temple construction projects, provided support for widows and orphans, and helped finance public works that benefited the entire community. These activities may have been motivated partly by religious beliefs or social expectations, but they also reflect an understanding that individual prosperity was connected to community welfare. The personal letters included in commercial archives also reveal the emotional dimensions of business relationships. Merchants expressed genuine affection for trusted partners, anxiety about risky ventures, pride in successful achievements, and disappointment when ventures failed. These emotions remind us that commerce in the ancient world, like today, was fundamentally a human activity that engaged people's deepest hopes and fears. A gentle conclusion. Lessons across time. As our journey through the commercial world of ancient Ur draws to a close, we find ourselves in the quiet archive rooms where scribes once bent over their clay tablets by flickering lamplight, carefully recording the transactions that kept this remarkable civilization functioning. The voices preserved in these ancient documents speak across 4 millennia, telling us stories of human ambition, ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptation that feel surprisingly familiar despite the vast gulf of time that separates us from their world. The environmental challenges that ultimately contributed to Ur's decline also offer sobering lessons for our own time. The agricultural intensification that supported the city's prosperity gradually undermined the ecological foundations on which it depended, creating vulnerabilities that proved impossible to overcome when other stresses emerged. This pattern of environmental degradation, followed by economic and social decline, has repeated itself many times throughout history, suggesting the importance of understanding the ecological limits within which all economic activity must ultimately operate. But perhaps the most inspiring lesson from Ur's archives is the demonstration of human adaptability and resilience in the face of changing conditions. Even as their world was transformed by environmental stress, political upheaval, and economic disruption, the merchants and administrators of Ur continued to innovate, to seek new opportunities, and to maintain the relationships and institutions that gave meaning to their lives. Their ultimate failure to prevent decline does not diminish the creativity and determination they showed in confronting unprecedented challenges. The preservation of their stories in clay tablets, surviving floods and invasions, and the collapse of empires seems almost miraculous when we consider how much of human experience has been lost to time. These fragile documents, carefully shaped by human hands 4,000 years ago, have become our most direct connection to the thoughts and experiences of people who lived in a world that was both utterly different from our own and remarkably similar in its fundamental human concerns. As archaeologists and scholars continue to study these archives, new stories emerge and our understanding deepens. Each translated tablet adds another thread to the complex tapestry of ancient life, revealing new connections and patterns that help us understand how human societies develop, flourish, and transform over time. The work of preserving and interpreting these ancient records represents its own form of international cooperation, as scholars from around the world collaborate to unlock the secrets of civilizations that existed long before our modern political boundaries were drawn. The legacy of Ur extends far beyond the specific business practices and technologies that its merchants and craftsmen developed. The city's most enduring contribution may be its demonstration that human societies can create institutions and relationships that enable individuals to cooperate across cultural, linguistic, and geographic boundaries for mutual benefit. This capacity for peaceful cooperation and mutual enrichment through trade remains one of humanity's most important achievements, and one that the archives of Ur help us understand in all its complexity and fragility. Now, as we prepare to leave behind the bustling marketplaces and quiet archive rooms of ancient Ur, take a moment to reflect on this remarkable journey we've shared. We've walked through workshops where skilled craftsmen shaped copper and gold, sailed with merchants across the Persian Gulf to distant ports, and sat with scribes as they recorded the intricate details of international business ventures. We've seen how human ingenuity and cooperation can create prosperity and cultural flowering, and we've also witnessed how environmental and political changes can transform even the most successful civilizations. Let your mind wander back through the streets of at its height, the narrow alleys between residential compounds where merchant families lived and worked, the wide boulevards where caravans arrived with goods from distant lands, the harbor where ships unloaded their precious cargoes. Picture the scribes in their archive rooms, carefully pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, creating records that would outlast the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the rise and fall of empires. Feel the continuity between their world and ours, the same human desires for security and prosperity, the same challenges of building trust and managing risk, the same satisfactions of successful cooperation and mutual achievement. The clay tablets they created with such care have become our teachers, showing us possibilities and pitfalls that remain relevant across the centuries. As you settle more deeply into your comfortable resting place, let the voices from these ancient archives grow quieter, their urgent commercial concerns fading into the peaceful rhythm of your own breathing. The merchants and scribes of have told their stories and shared their insights. Their tablets rest safely in museum collections around the world, preserving their wisdom for future generations to discover and learn from. The mathematical calculations that once demanded such precise attention can dissolve into the gentle mathematics of sleep, the regular rhythm of heartbeat and breath, the gradual slowing of thought and sensation. The complex trade networks that once connected distant civilizations become like the neural networks in your mind, carrying you peacefully toward rest and restoration. The quality standards that ancient craftsmen maintained with such dedication transform into the quality of deep, restorative sleep that your body creates naturally. The systematic record-keeping that preserved 4,000 years of human experience becomes the unconscious recording of dreams and rest that your mind performs as you sleep. The trust that made ancient commerce possible becomes the trust you place in your own body's wisdom, knowing that sleep will bring the restoration and renewal you need. The partnerships that enabled merchants to share risks and opportunities become the partnership between your conscious and unconscious mind, working together to process the day's experiences and prepare for tomorrow's possibilities. The international networks that brought prosperity to ancient become the universal human need for rest that connects you with countless others who have found peace in sleep across all the generations of human history. The preservation of knowledge in written form becomes the preservation of your own well-being through the healing power of rest. Let the gentle wisdom of these ancient voices guide you now into the timeless realm of sleep, where the boundaries between past and present dissolve, where the concerns of commerce fade into the deeper rhythms of human existence, where the clay tablets of rest peacefully in their museum cases while you rest peacefully in your chosen place of comfort and safety. The archives are closed now. The scribes have put down their styluses. The merchants have returned from their journeys. The tablets preserve their stories for tomorrow's scholars to study, but tonight belongs to rest, to the quiet satisfaction of learning shared, to the peaceful transition from ancient wisdom to modern dreams. Sleep well, knowing that human curiosity and cooperation have created wonders across the millennia, and that your own rest contributes to the continuing story of human flourishing that began so long ago in the workshops and archive rooms of ancient The tablets have told their tales. The merchants have completed their transactions, and you have earned your rest through this long journey into the fascinating world of ancient commerce. Let sleep come naturally now, as steady and reliable as the river that once flowed past Ur's docks, as enduring as the clay tablets that preserve its memory, as peaceful as the archive rooms where scribes once worked by lamplight, and where their wisdom now rests in eternal silence.